a drug designed to treat erectile dysfunction is now reversing permanent genetic deafness in laboratory studies. Yes, you heard that right. Viagra, the little blue pill that became a cultural phenomenon in the late 90s, might be the key to restoring hearing in people born deaf. And the science behind this discovery. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Welcome back to Mind and Marvel, where we decode the most fascinating scientific breakthroughs that are reshaping our understanding of medicine and the human body. Today's story starts in 3 unrelated families in Turkey, all sharing a devastating diagnosis: permanent, irreversible hearing loss from birth. For generations, doctors told them there was nothing that could be done. Sensorineural hearing loss, that's the technical term, was considered a life sentence. No cure, no treatment, just hearing aids and cochlear implants to help manage the symptoms. But in November 2025, an international team of researchers published a study that changed everything. They didn't just discover what was causing the deafness in these families. They found 2 potential treatments. One is a simple amino acid supplement you can buy at any health store. The other, Sildenafil, better known as Viagra. Now, before your mind goes where mine initially went, no, this isn't about any unintended side effects of taking Viagra. This is about a legitimate, scientifically validated mechanism by which this drug can repair cellular damage in the inner ear. And here's what makes this discovery so revolutionary. It's not just about treating one rare condition. This research has opened a door to understanding how genetic deafness works at the molecular level, and it might have implications for millions of people with age-related hearing loss, too. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into genes, enzymes, signaling molecules, and fruit flies. Yes, fruit flies played a crucial role in this discovery, and by the end, you'll understand exactly how a drug designed for blood vessels in one part of the body can repair nerve cells in your ears. Let's start at the beginning, the gene. The researchers identified 3 specific mutations in a gene called CPD, which stands for carboxypeptidase D. Now, I know that's a mouthful, so let's just call it CPD. Here's the thing about CPD. Before this study, scientists knew it existed, but they had no idea it played any role in hearing. CPD was known as a protein-modifying enzyme, basically, a molecular editor that makes small adjustments to other proteins in your body. It does its work throughout your body, but nobody had connected it to the inner ear. So how did researchers find this connection? They used advanced gene sequencing technology to analyze the DNA of these 3 families in Turkey, who all had the same type of congenital deafness. And they found something remarkable. All of them had rare variants, mutations, in the exact same gene. CPD. Think about it like this. Imagine you're a detective investigating 3 separate burglaries in different neighborhoods. The victims don't know each other. The crimes happened at different times. But when you analyze the evidence, you discover that all 3 crime scenes have the exact same rare fingerprint. That's your smoking gun. That's CPD. But finding the gene was just the first step. The real breakthrough came when researchers figured out what CPD actually does in the ear and what happens when it's broken. Using sophisticated laboratory techniques, the team analyzed skin tissue from the affected patients and created mouse models. These are mice genetically engineered to have the same CPD mutations. They also studied fruit flies with similar genetic changes, and what they discovered was a molecular chain reaction that leads directly to hearing loss. Here's how it works. CPD plays a crucial role in producing an amino acid called arginine. You might have heard of arginine. It's sometimes sold as a supplement for athletic performance or heart health, but in the context of your inner ear, arginine is absolutely essential for keeping your hearing cells alive. When CPD is mutated and not working properly, arginine production drops, and without enough arginine you can't make adequate amounts of another critical molecule, nitric oxide. Yes, that's the same nitric oxide that Viagra affects, but we'll get to that in a minute. The researchers found that in mice with broken CPD genes, the sensory cells in the cochlea, that's the snail-shaped structure in your inner ear responsible for converting sound vibrations into electrical signals. These cells become stressed and eventually die. Specifically, the tiny hair cells that detect sound vibrations get damaged. Imagine your cochlea as a concert hall with thousands of microphones arranged to pick up different frequencies. Each microphone is incredibly sensitive and needs a constant power supply to function. When CPD is broken, it's like cutting the power cables to these microphones. One by one, they shut down, and once they're gone, they're gone. No sound detection, no hearing. The same pattern appeared in fruit flies. When researchers mutated CPD-like genes in fruit flies, yes, fruit flies have something similar, the insects showed signs of hearing loss and balance problems. Their equivalent of an inner ear wasn't functioning properly. This consistency across humans, mice, and fruit flies told researchers they were onto something fundamental, a basic biological mechanism that evolution has preserved across vastly different species because it's so essential for hearing. Now we get to the really fascinating part, the molecular pathway that connects a genetic mutation to cell death and ultimately to the Viagra connection. Remember how I said CPD helps produce arginine and arginine is needed to make nitric oxide? This is where the story gets interesting because nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in your entire body. Let me explain what nitric oxide does. It's a gas, yes, a gas, that acts as a messenger between cells. In the 1990s, 3 scientists won the Nobel Prize for discovering how nitric oxide works in the cardiovascular system. It helps blood vessels relax and expand, which increases blood flow. This is exactly why Viagra works for erectile dysfunction. It enhances the effects of nitric oxide in blood vessels. But nitric oxide doesn't just affect blood vessels, it also plays critical roles in the nervous system, including in the delicate sensory cells of your inner ear. The researchers discovered that when CPD is mutated, you get a domino effect. Less functional CPD means less arginine means less nitric oxide, and less nitric oxide means your ear cells can't maintain the signaling pathways they need to survive. But there's another molecule in this story, something called cyclic GMP, or cGMP for short. If nitric oxide is the message, cGMP is what the cell does with that message. Nitric oxide triggers the production of cGMP, which then activates a whole cascade of protective processes inside the cell. Think of it like this. Imagine your cells are houses, and cGMP is the electricity that powers all the appliances. Nitric oxide is like the power company sending electricity through the lines. When you don't have enough nitric oxide, when the power company isn't sending enough electricity, the cGMP levels drop, and suddenly, your cellular appliances start shutting off. Lights go out. The refrigerator stops. The heating fails. The house, your cell, can't function properly. In the inner ear, when cGMP levels drop, the hair cells that detect sound become stressed. They can't maintain their normal functions. They start to deteriorate. Eventually, they die. And remember, these cells don't regenerate in humans. Once they're gone forever. The researchers saw this pattern clearly when they examined mouse cochlea cells with mutated CPD genes. The cells showed dramatically reduced levels of both nitric oxide and cGMP. And predictably, these cells were dying off at a much higher rate than normal cells. The fruit fly studies confirmed the same pattern. When researchers disrupted similar pathways in fruit flies, the insects showed the insect equivalent of hearing loss. They couldn't detect vibrations properly, and they had balance problems because their sensory organs weren't working correctly. Now, here's where the Viagra connection becomes crystal clear. Viagra, Sildenafil is its scientific name, doesn't create nitric oxide. Instead, it protects cGMP from being broken down too quickly. There's an enzyme in your body called phosphodiesterase 5, or PDE5, that normally breaks down cGMP. Viagra inhibits PDE5, which means cGMP sticks around longer and has more time to do its job. So even if you're not making quite enough nitric oxide because of a CPD mutation, Viagra can help compensate by making sure the cGMP you do produce stays active longer. It's like having a leaky bucket. Viagra doesn't fill the bucket faster, but it does plug some of the holes so less water leaks out. The beauty of this mechanism is that it's elegantly simple once you understand it. A genetic mutation disrupts arginine production, which reduces nitric oxide, which lowers cGMP, which kills cells. Viagra steps in and boosts cGMP levels back up, giving cells a better chance to survive. And here's something remarkable. The researchers tested this in the lab. They took cells from patients with CPD mutations and treated them with sildenafil. The result? Improved cell survival. The cells that should have been dying were staying alive when exposed to Viagra. They did similar tests with the fruit flies and saw the same thing. Sildenafil reduced the hearing loss behaviors in flies with mutated genes. The molecular rescue worked across species. So we understand the problem and we understand the mechanism. Now let's talk about the solutions, because this study identified not just one, but two potential treatments. The first is beautifully simple: arginine supplementation. Remember, the root problem is that mutated CPD leads to insufficient arginine production. So the most straightforward solution is to simply provide more arginine directly. Arginine is an amino acid, one of the building blocks of proteins, and it's already sold as a dietary supplement. Athletes sometimes take it for performance enhancement. People with certain cardiovascular conditions take it to support blood flow. It's generally considered safe, widely available, and inexpensive. The researchers tested this approach in their laboratory models. They gave arginine supplements to patient-derived cells with CPD mutations. The result? Cell survival improved significantly. By bypassing the broken CPD pathway and providing arginine directly, they were able to restore enough nitric oxide and cGMP production to keep cells alive. They saw similar results in fruit flies. When they supplemented the diet of genetically modified flies with arginine, the flies showed reduced hearing loss behaviors. Their sensory systems functioned better. Now, it's crucial to understand, this research is still in early stages. The experiments were done in cells and in animal models, not in human patients with hearing loss. Clinical trials haven't happened yet, so we can't say definitively that arginine supplements will restore hearing in people with CPD mutations. But the mechanism makes biological sense, and the laboratory evidence is compelling. The second treatment option, and this is the one getting headlines, is sildenafil, Viagra. And as we discussed in the previous section, the mechanism here is different but complementary. Instead of providing more arginine to make more nitric oxide, Viagra works downstream by protecting cGMP from being broken down. The researchers tested sildenafil in the same laboratory models. Patient cells with CPD mutations treated with sildenafil showed improved survival rates. Fruit flies with similar genetic problems, given sildenafil, demonstrated reduced hearing loss symptoms. What's particularly exciting about the sildenafil approach is that we already know a lot about how this drug works in humans. It's been used for erectile dysfunction since 1998. That's over 25 years of clinical experience. We know its safety profile. We know its side effects. We know how it's metabolized. This means the path from laboratory discovery to potential clinical application could be much faster than with a completely new drug. That said, and this is really important, please don't go out and start taking Viagra if you have hearing loss. First, this research specifically applies to genetic hearing loss caused by CPD mutations, which is quite rare. It's not going to help with the most common causes of hearing loss, like age-related deterioration or noise damage. Second, any medication should only be taken under medical supervision, especially one like sildenafil that can have serious interactions with other drugs and health conditions. But here's where the implications get broader. The researchers noted that single mutations in CPD, not the double mutations found in these Turkish families, but less severe variants, might be more common in the general population, and these milder mutations could potentially be a risk factor for age-related hearing loss. Professor Rong Grace Zhai, the lead researcher from the University of Chicago, raised this exact question in the study. How many people carry variants in this gene? Is there a susceptibility to age-dependent hearing loss? Could this be a risk factor for other types of sensory problems? If the answer is yes, and that's a big if that requires more research, then understanding the CPD pathway could have implications for millions of people, not just those with rare genetic conditions. The study also raises another intriguing possibility: gene therapy. Now that researchers understand exactly which gene is causing the problem and how it works, they can start developing targeted genetic treatments. Imagine being able to correct or compensate for CPD mutations directly at the DNA level. We're not there yet, but the field of gene therapy for hearing loss is actively developing, and each discovery like this brings us closer. What makes this study particularly powerful is its completeness. The researchers didn't just identify a gene and stop. They worked out the entire molecular pathway. They figured out what was going wrong at each step. They tested 2 different intervention strategies. They validated their findings across multiple species and multiple types of experiments. This is rigorous, thorough science, exactly the kind of foundation needed to develop real treatments. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about why this discovery is so significant beyond just one rare type of hearing loss. First, this study represents a fundamental shift in how we think about genetic deafness. For decades, congenital hearing loss has been considered irreversible, something you're born with and learn to live with. Hearing aids and cochlear implants have been the only options, but this research demonstrates that even genetic hearing loss might be treatable at the molecular level. That's a paradigm shift. Second, it shows the incredible power of understanding disease mechanisms. Once you know exactly what's going wrong, which gene, which enzyme, which signaling molecule, you can design rational interventions. The Arginine and Sildenafil treatments didn't come from random trial and error. They came from understanding the precise molecular pathway and targeting specific steps in that pathway. Third, this study is a perfect example of drug repurposing. Viagra was developed for one purpose, later became famous for another purpose, and now might have a completely different medical application in treating hearing loss. This is increasingly common in modern medicine. We discover that drugs we've been using for years have unexpected benefits when applied to different conditions. It's faster and safer than developing entirely new drugs from scratch. Fourth, the use of multiple research models, human cells, mice, and fruit flies, demonstrates how comparative biology helps us understand fundamental processes. The fact that the same mechanism operates across such different species tells us we're looking at something evolutionarily ancient and biologically essential. And finally, this opens doors for future research. Now that we know CPD matters for hearing, researchers can look for other genes and related pathways. They can investigate whether variations in CPD contribute to other hearing problems. They can explore whether similar mechanisms operate in other sensory systems, maybe vision, maybe smell. According to the research, around 3 in 2,000 people are born with hearing loss. That might sound rare, but on a global scale, that's millions of people. And if this work leads to treatments, even partial restoration of hearing would be life-changing for those individuals and their families. But perhaps the most exciting implication is what this tells us about the future of personalized medicine. As genetic sequencing becomes cheaper and more common, we'll be able to identify not just rare mutations, like these CPD variants, but also subtle genetic variations that increase disease risk. And once we understand the molecular mechanisms, we can intervene earlier, more precisely, and more effectively. Before we wrap up, let's be clear about what this study does and doesn't tell us. What it does tell us: mutations in the CPD gene cause a specific type of genetic hearing loss through a well-characterized molecular mechanism. Arginine supplementation and sildenafil can improve cell survival and reduce hearing loss behaviors in laboratory models. This mechanism makes biological sense and is validated across multiple experimental systems. What it doesn't tell us yet: whether Arginine or Sildenafil will actually restore hearing in human patients, whether these treatments would work if started after birth or if they need to be given during development, what the optimal dosing would be, whether there are any unforeseen side effects when used specifically for hearing loss, and crucially, whether this has any relevance to the more common forms of hearing loss that most people experience. These are the questions that clinical trials will need to answer. And clinical trials take time, years, typically, to design, conduct, and analyze properly. So if you or someone you know has hearing loss, this is not yet a treatment option, but it is a reason for hope, and it's a sign that the field of hearing loss research is making real progress toward understanding and potentially treating the underlying causes of deafness. If you're curious about whether you or a family member might carry CPD mutations, genetic testing is increasingly accessible. Talk to a genetic counselor or a specialist in hearing loss. They can help you understand your family history and whether testing might be appropriate. And as always, never start taking any medication, including supplements, without consulting a healthcare provider, especially if you have existing health conditions or take other medications. And there you have it. The remarkable story of how scientists traced a rare form of genetic deafness to mutations in a single gene called CPD, worked out the entire molecular pathway from gene to cell death, and identified 2 potential treatments, including, surprisingly, Viagra. This research, published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation in 2025 by an international team led by Professor Rong Grace Zhai at the University of Chicago, represents the kind of thorough, mechanistic science that leads to real medical breakthroughs. From Turkish families with congenital deafness to fruit flies with balance problems, from arginine to nitric oxide to cyclic GMP, from understanding to potential treatment. This is science at its best. Curious, rigorous, collaborative, and ultimately hopeful. The path from laboratory discovery to clinical treatment is long and requires patience, but every journey starts with a single step, and this study is a giant leap forward in understanding how genetic hearing loss works and how we might someday treat it. If you found this deep dive into molecular biology fascinating, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to Mind and Marvel for more cutting-edge science explanations, and drop a comment letting me know what you think. Should we cover more genetic discoveries? More surprising drug repurposing stories? What aspects of hearing and neuroscience interest you most? Thanks for watching, Curious Minds. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, stay scientifically literate, and keep marveling at the incredible discoveries happening in laboratories around the world right now.